So our next session is on APEC and trade sustainability, and I'm very happy to have our next speakers here. Rebecca Sta Maria is the Executive Director of the APEC Secretariat. So she's based here in Singapore, but before that she was in Malaysia, where she was a trade negotiator like Steve Olson, but for Malaysia, and Secretary General of their Trade Ministry, where she oversaw Malaysia's positions on the TPP and other agreements. She also chaired the body that drafted ASEAN's economic community blueprints for 2015 and 2025. So while we will have Dennis Hewitt speaker later addressing some of those things, you can also ask her. Carlos Kuriyama is joining us for a second time. He is the director of the Policy Support Unit at the APEC Secretariat, and he previously worked on, mainly with Peru's Ministry of Foreign Trade, on a number of FTAs there. He also, last year, he spoke on supply chain issues. So while today we'll be talking a lot about trade sustainability and what that looks like, he can also answer questions related to supply chains. So please join me in welcoming these two from APEC. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll get started very quickly. I know I was told to limit, to make sure that I keep to time. That's always a challenge. So let's get started. Let me do a very quick introduction in case folks are not familiar with APEC. We are informal, we are non-binding. Our members are called economies and not countries, so we're very careful to mention that. We're significant in the context of world population, global trade, and GDP. And 38% of population, 48% of trade, and about 62% of GDP. The members, 21 member economies, they spread around the rim of the Pacific Ocean. One reason why we are called economies and not countries or states is because of the One China policy. So we have Hong Kong and Chinese Taipei. And in our context, we refer to Taiwan as Chinese Taipei as opposed to one is normally, used in journalism circles. Our mission is very straightforward. We are focused on trade and investment. This was the genesis of APEC. When it was formed in 1989, it was all about trade and investment for the region. And a key part of the work that we do is also on economic cooperation, ecotech, economic technical cooperation, capacity building, technical assistance. So that's a key part of the work that we do. Recall that we are not binding, so we do not negotiate agreements, but we build on it. We help to build capacity of policymakers and to some extent parts of the business community, specifically small and medium enterprises, so that they can then participate in the global economy, as it were. We look at improving standards of living. I suppose that's very aspirational. At the end of the day, you want to make sure that whatever you do brings benefits to your people. And again, increasingly, and this I will go into a bit more detail on this, on sustainable economic growth. This is increasingly becoming a key part of the work that we do. And if we talk of green growth, really it is not new to APEC. When the leaders met for the first time on Blake Island in the US, when that was convened by Clinton, the first meeting of leaders, they already talked about green growth and sustainable growth. And this was 1993. So, I mean, really, it's part of our DNA, if you want to put it that way. And over the years, following 1993, we established what we call the BOGO goals, and that was for free trade and investment, liberalizing trade and investment. And that was what was guiding us in all the work that we were doing. And the vision was for the global goals was to be achieved by 2020. So in 2020, we began the whole conversation of where do we want to go? Where would APEC see itself in the next 10, 20 years? And in 2020, in the midst of COVID and the lockdown, we sat and considered our vision for the next few years, and that's the Putrajaya Vision 2040. The only reason it's called Putrajaya is because it was the year when Malaysia chaired APEC. So we finally agreed on this vision, the vision of an open, dynamic, resilient. Very importantly, then we talked of a peaceful Asia-Pacific community. Prosperity for all our people, that's always been our driving, our red on that. And trade and investment is one pillar. We had innovation and digitalization as the second pillar. And very importantly, the third pillar, which is a strong and inclusive and sustainable Asia-Pacific. That is when we really embedded the whole conversation on the green economy. And we did this in 2020. We started, in earnest, drafting this and to provide this new direction for APEC. So we went from just being focused on trade and investment liberalization to where we are today. And, when we talk about the green economy and sustainability, it's important because APEC, we contribute significantly to greenhouse gas emissions. And as the statistics show, 7 out of 10 of the world's top 10 CO2 emitting economies are in APEC. So clearly that conversation is not something we're ignoring. We are paying close attention to what we can do as a community, as a grouping, to ensure that, we put our money where our mouth is. We've got your vision. You've said this is what you want to see for yourself. So how do you do this? So there is good news in that we are working on climate change. And if you look at how we've worked on forest cover, this was some decision that was made collectively by APEC ministers, and then, it gets rolled out. So increasing forest coverage, we're working on renewable energy, a lot of commitments, aspirational statements being made, but, there's follow through. It's very important that we follow through on this. And this year, after 8 years, we're having the first energy ministers meeting. So that really, drives home the importance that we're paying to this whole idea of making sure we work together on renewable energy, for example. And I'll mention it in passing afterwards, the Just Energy Transition Initiative that we have. Also, looking at environmental goods. This is significant in that we started the conversation on environmental goods some years ago, and in 2011, when US was chair of APEC, we pushed very hard to get us to a point where we could, agree on a list of environmental goods, 54 items, which we took to 2012 when Russia was chair of APEC, took it through the process. It's a government body, so there's always processes that you need to go through. So while the list was finalized in 2011, it got the final green light in 2012. And again, because APEC is non-binding, we do not have agreements, we do not negotiate agreements, we took this list of 54 items, environmental goods, for liberalization, for consideration at a global scale to the WTO. And the negotiations, the work on the environmental goods agreement at the WTO has its genesis in APEC. So that's a significant contribution that we've made, and we are engaged at the WTO on ensuring that members commit to the liberalization of market access for those goods. And today we're actually working on services as well. Not sure whether you'll be touching on services, environmental services, but there's also work on environmental services, and that's a little more. I suppose it's a little bit more difficult because of definition. What is an environmental service? So working on a reference list, and we've arrived at a reference list. We managed to get to that last year. So now it's, what do we do with it? Like I said, we are non-negotiating. We don't negotiate. We're not a negotiating body, rather. So moving it to the WTO to hope that, you get traction and you get economies or countries, states negotiating services, environmental services agreement. Bonds, our finance minister's track works on green bonds as well. Some salient points, these are just a bunch of initiatives that we've put in place. Like I said, this is not a new conversation that APEC has been having on environmental goods. And now we've added another layer of environmental services. And very important, building capacity for micro, small, and medium enterprises to ensure that they can participate in all these initiatives for renewable energy, for green initiatives. And this year, U.S. as the host economy has put an emphasis on the just energy transition, because really at the end of the day is how do you can have all that rhetoric around green growth and sustainable growth, but how do you do it? What do you do? So we have these 4 areas that we have highlighted: supporting labor policies and access to work. At the end of the day, there will be displacement. So how do you manage that? Structural reforms are required to ensure that we have the policies that support our initiatives of energy transition. And APEC does a lot of work on structural reform. Like I said, we do not have agreements, we don't negotiate agreements, but we do have exchange of information and best practice on how to ensure that we go on this route of structural reforms. Just taking another stand on how important structural reforms are, we negotiate trade agreements. We have them all in place. So you have market access for X, Y, and Z. But if you do not have in parallel structural reforms that will help your economy, that will help your businesses take advantage of those market access requirements, the market access facilities, then those trade agreements don't mean anything. So if you don't have the infrastructure, the technical infrastructure, the digital infrastructure to take advantage of market access, e-commerce, for example, if you talk about e-commerce and you've embedded it into your trade agreement, but you've done almost nothing on your digital infrastructure, then your folks cannot take advantage of all that market access facilities that you've negotiated. So structural reform conversations that we have in APEC is really to share best practice, and then for member economies to then run with those ideas. We have dialogues on we have stakeholder dialogues for this. We are very involved in that process. We have our Business Advisory Council, which are really businesses, come in and have those deep conversations of what we can and cannot do, or what we should do more of when you're talking of energy transitions. How will that impact small and medium enterprises? For us, that's important. What do you do in your home economy to ensure that this does not, whatever you're putting in place, with all those aspirational goals for energy transitions, don't disadvantage the smaller companies. So, and another big conversation that we're having is also on climate change readiness. There's work that's being done to determine how the technological part of it, how ready are we to move on with some of the initiatives that we have articulated for ourselves. So clearly, like I said, there's no standing still. There's a lot that we are doing, and a lot of ideas that are coming through our discussions in APEC are finding their way into trade agreements. For example, the Australia-Singapore Green Growth Agreement has elements. In fact, they've taken elements of our discussions at APEC and put it into the agreement and taking that forward. So you'll see a lot. We provide that avenue for ideas that should, economies can then take forward and run with them. But as I said, at the end of the day, it's about our people. So that's my part. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Erika, and good morning, everyone, and thank you very much to the National Press Foundation and the Heritage Foundation for the invitation to participate in this event. So what I would like to do this morning is to talk about basically what are the issues that are affecting trade sustainability. So in other words, can we say that we could sustain trade growth in the near future? Can we sustain trade growth in terms of value and volume? What's going on? So there are some factors that we need to take into account right now. The first one is that there are some changes in supply chain strategies. So what's going on here? What is happening is that many firms, companies, are transferring businesses or they are deciding to do certain parts of production processes in other places. So they are doing some nearshoring or friendshoring or reshoring. One of the things that we are noticing is that the companies are switching their business model from a just-in-time model to a just-in-case model. So a just-in-time model was basically sourcing parts and components from all over the world, most likely from the most efficient place that offer a good price and could supply the things rapidly. And now what we are doing is a just-in-case model where we are basically building redundancy. So in other words, we are holding some precautionary stocks of parts, components, and we are also diversifying suppliers. What's the problem about this? Is that to build up resilience is very costly. And the question is this going to be sustainable or not? If we have a company that is not going to a just-in-case model, is using still a just-in-time model, I mean, the goods are going to be cheaper. But from time to time, if there are some, policy issues affecting, the free flow of goods, that company may encounter certain problems. So it's very hard to tell at this point if this is going to be sustainable or not, but this is something that definitely is changing a bit how trade is moving. The second issue that we have to take into account is geoeconomic fragmentation. So we are noticing that some firms are moving out of certain places to go to other places. In Asia, it's starting to happening, but it's not happening in all sectors. It's happening in very specific sectors. For example, technology, products that are intensive in technology. Also, some sectors related to renewable energy. And interestingly, this is happening in sectors that are included in these sort of measures that the U.S. implemented by increasing tariffs particularly from China. So this started during the Trump administration. And the thing is that in addition to that, right, after the U.S. implemented these measures, also China implemented some retaliatory measures. So this has affected the strategies of firms, and some firms, especially greenfield investments or new investments, are looking for other markets as well. And many of these new investments are coming to ASEAN. We don't see that, many investment based in FDI, based in China, that are moving in flocks to Southeast Asia, because the companies invested billions of dollars in China, and it's not easy to move out from one day to the other. And the reason why they are looking at Southeast Asia is because they are concerned that there could be some other further measures that could affect the free flow of goods, components, transfer of technology, among other things. You will see on the chart on the right side that why they choose ASEAN. In the case of technology-intensive sectors, ASEAN relies a lot on foreign value added. And so, in other words, it's in the interest of ASEAN to keep markets open, to reduce barriers to trade and investment. And so we are seeing some movement in this regard, but again, it's not in all sectors. If we have a look, for example, at the bilateral trade flows between U.S. and China, they are at the highest historic level ever. But it's those goods that were included in the measures implemented by the Trump administration, whose trade has been declining a bit, and as well as those goods that were part of the retaliatory measures implemented by China. Then another factor that we need to take into account is that the economy has been slowing down a bit recently. So after the pandemic, we just had the economy plummeting, and then the economy started to recover. But we are not able to sustain those initial growth rates from late 2021, 2022. So, and the problem is this, that the global slowdown means a reduced external demand. It means that trade is going to be affected. And why is this happening? There are some issues. For example, we have supply-demand imbalances. This is also creating inflationary pressures, and because of this, central banks have aggressively been increasing interest rates. Higher interest rates mean basically that the cost of credit is more expensive, and so it's going to be more expensive for consumption and for investment. This could therefore affect to some way the economic recovery for this year and the next few years. The other factor that we need to take into account is that the government, the public debt is increasing in both developed and developing economies. And why this is happening? Basically, because of the pandemic, in order to revitalize the economy, to recover the economy, governments decided to increase public expenditure. But this has increased public debt. And this means also higher risk and higher interest rates. And this could affect trade by basically affecting trade finance. So it would be more expensive to get credit in order to export, import. Another point that we need to take a close look at is at the accumulation of trade restrictive measures. So this chart basically shows the data in the APEC region, how the way WTO reported. So on the left hand, we have trade facilitating and trade restrictive measures. And we notice that trade facilitating measures are greater than trade restrictive measures, but both of them are increasing. So we have more trade restrictive measures. But on the right hand, we have another type of measures that are the trade remedies. So anti-dumping measures, countervailing duties, safeguards. And they are going up substantially. So if we add the trade remedies to the trade restrictive measures in the left side, so we notice that we are having many more, trade restrictive measures in, and this is not just in the APEC region; it's all over the world. And this is something that we need to be careful about, and it may hurt trade. The other reason that I think we have to be worried about is that the pandemic brought more inequality to this world, not just into the APEC region. And we can see that the poorest are getting worse off, and the richest are getting better off. And this is in terms of income and in terms of the accumulated, the personal wealth. And so what's the problem about this? The issue is that raising inequality could drive to instability. from the political perspective, from the socioeconomic perspective. And when we have instability, we would have episodes in many places about, for example, blocked roads, airports, ports, strikes, workers that cannot go to their offices, their factories to produce. And this could therefore disrupt supply chains and affect trade. And this is, sorry, not number 6, it's number 7. My apologies for the typo, but this is the last factor that we need to take into account: weather disruptions, El Niño global. So when we have usually a strong El Niño, what happens is that we are having problems in the economy in a way that the agricultural output, the fishing output goes down. Also, we are having issues with supply chains because there are a lot of floods, droughts, and natural disasters that are affecting supply chains, and a lot of infrastructure gets damaged, basically. And when we have these episodes of El Niño, of course, the economic growth is very low or even declines. The economy sometimes gets into recession. Also, we have issues of disease outbreak. And because of these difficulties, governments feel motivated to increase public expenditure. This also affects issues regarding debt. And it also reduces the ability of governments to repay debts because economic activity is going down. So tax collection is not at the best stage, at the best situation, right? And the other problem of El Niño is that historically we have seen that those economies, governments facing very strong El Niño, this El Niño phenomenon, tend to face social conflicts, and the risk of conflict usually increases. So it brings more instability. So right now, you are experiencing Singapore weather. And I've been here in Singapore for 14 years, and I think this is the hottest year I've ever experienced. So this anecdotal fact for me tells me that this El Niño global is going to be very intense, and probably it's going to be a really bad one, like the ones we had in 1997, 98, and also back in 1983 and 1984. And to finalize, the estimates in terms of losses, if we have a strong El Niño phenomenon, it's going to be around $3 trillion. So it's a lot of money and resources. All right, so I think I spoke a lot, so I leave it there. Thank you so much for your attention, and look forward to hearing your comments.
Hello, this is Monica from Bangladesh and Lord of Humanitarian Tax. My question is, economies. Two big economies, China and US, are member of APEC, and there are trade tension between the two countries. So whether these relation affecting the functionality of APEC and its vision. Thank you.
Thank you. So do we, how do you want to manage this? Do you want to have questions first and then we answer? You want us to one-on-one? Each, okay. APEC is a very interesting organization in that we have China, US, Russia, and Chinese Taipei in the same room. And yes, you can't ignore that there are tensions outside which get brought into the room. But what's important is that because we are non-binding, we are less constrained in that sense. So you can still have conversations regardless of the tensions outside the room. But, nothing to prevent economies from bringing those concerns into their discussions. But what happens, again, is how it's moderated, how it's managed. I recall the first time we met in person last year. We had the first Ministers for Trade meeting. And, we had some serious discussions on the work that we were doing and how we were contributing to COVID recovery. We did quite a bit of work during
during the COVID period to ensure the supply of essential goods and services at that time, because that was of concern. And I know PSU did a lot of work on how much market access and how we could facilitate access of these supplies. And yeah, when the first time the ministers met in person in Bangkok, that was just after February 24th. So that was still very, right there, it's in your face. And there was a walkout by some ministers. And what was a pity was there was a lot of other discussions that took place, regardless of, after they walked out, it was more posturing, I say, and then they came back and continued discussions. What was disappointing for me was that the media focused on the walkout rather than what was being discussed and the work that was being done post-COVID. So, that's some things that we need to manage in the room, but some things are beyond your control. So those issues the background noise will still be there. It was there, yes, last year, it's there this year. But I think we have decided that, at the end of the day, we cannot stop work because of this tension. We need to continue. And really, that's the focus. It's been the focus and will continue to be the focus this year. We are not blind to the fact that there is this realities. And I think it's important. The economies are free to express their concerns and their disappointment, their anger even, but it's all managed at the end of the day.
And just to complement, the good thing is that we all, the 21 delegations, are meeting and talking one another. So it would be really bad thing. That wouldn't be happening, but it's happening. All the delegations were invited to the U.S. and all of them attended.
Yep.
Hello, thank you. This is Komel. I am a journalist from South Korea, based in South Korea. I have a long concern and struggle. I really appreciate your mention about sustainable developments, but as it was in your presentation from the very beginning, we talk about GDP and we already set a goal for a couple of years that GDP should be high, and then other countries are advanced countries and countries who want to be advanced. But the thing is, GDP itself is not really showing us anything. And I think it's time to really bring up alternative, because having GDP as the goal and then
measure
have let's say, but it should be sustainable. It ends up greenwashing, people just taking some, using world resources and taking some pictures that we help these people in the village. So isn't it time to don't mention about it and bring up alternatives?
Yeah, I thank you for bringing that up, because in 2020, at the height of the COVID pandemic, we had conversations on beyond GDP, and we talked about other measures to complement, not necessarily displacing GDP, but to complement. And the Human Development Index was one, gender disparity index, all these discussions we had. And from a gender perspective, every time I get an opportunity, I do advocate for us to look beyond GDP. My passion is for care work that's unpaid. And how do you factor that in? For me, that's something that I keep talking about, that we need to consider ways. GDP is an easier way to measure, right? It's straightforward, but it's not necessarily. And I think that's Donnie. You may want to hear the economist here. I'm just a passionate woman who wants to make sure that care work is included, regardless of whether it's done unpaid care work, whether it's done by men or women. But it should somehow find its way into our conversations.
Yeah, the GDP is basically a growth indicator, but what we are looking more in APEC is development indicators. So, for example, those indicators of inequality that I showed. Also now this year, for example, we are launching a report called the APEC Women in the Economy Dashboard, where we show the levels of economic empowerment of women all over the APEC region, and it's about access to capital assets, access to labor markets, if they are having opportunities to get skills and also climb up in their professional career, also how they are taking up the use of new technologies, how many, for example, companies with women leaders we have, and also how many women leaders at the political level we have. So these are some examples. Other examples that we are looking at, I mean, in APEC, the core of the discussion is about economic issues. So we look at issues from regulatory reforms, for example. How can it make it cheaper, easier, and faster to do business? Indicators that are looking at regulatory restrictions, so things that I think people, can feel on the streets, and those sort of indicators we are starting to look at. We are looking also at indicators that are related to green sustainable issues, right? Like CO2 emissions per capita, the percentage of the population that have access to basic services, for example, water and sanitation facilities, among other things.
Yeah, and I think it's important because I think that I'm going to give an example of a World Bank study which used GDP as a basis and said GDP per capita and said, in the context of one country, to say this state in this country is high income. Oh, come on. We said it's not about the GDP per capita, but the distribution, of wealth. So, I mean, so it can be misleading. So we need to also have the messaging that some of these indicators need to be reviewed and really taken in the context of a particular economy. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Hannah from Eco Business. I'm based in the Philippines. I was just wondering, because I saw one of your slides of how you want to support the just energy transition. How you have a specific role on the JETP and the Just Energy Transition Program of the G20. How are you supporting them in any specific way?
Yeah, the conversation is starting, and like I said, US put it on the table. So that's important. We bring in the key players, the private sector, academia, and we have those dialogues. We've started this year, and like I said, this is the first time we're having the energy ministers meeting. So you will hear more of the work that's being done by the different economies to facilitate this just transition.
So it's a lot about, for example, a lot of training skills, education and training skills. And in APEC, we have a Human Resources Development Working Group that is starting to discuss these issues, because, I mean, we have a concern, right? If we try to make this transition to a greener economy, what's going to happen to those workers that are, participating in traditional industries? So it's important to have social safety nets to help them to make the transition. And part of it also includes training policies and a good public-private partnerships.
Also the sessions with the small and medium enterprises as well. We have a small and SME working group that's also taking this on board, because definitely they will also need to see how they can manage their processes with this transition and the investments that will be required to facilitate this transition. So it's not just about saying that we're going to have just transition. Yeah. It's there's a lot more to it than that. But what's important is that those difficult conversations are being held now. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Shagun. I'm based in Delhi, India. So the APEC model is unlike WTO, and there are no negotiations and more engagement and discussions. And now that the economies are discussing more of green policy measures and just transition, sustainability, is there any way to check the policy effectiveness of these measures? Because the model is also somewhat similar to NDCs under the Paris Agreement, which are said to be legally binding, but at the end, I mean, they're not. So here in this context, in the APEC context, is there any way to check what is the effectiveness of these measures?
It's not, we have to work together with the PSU. But what we do is we track and monitor implementation of, because like I said, we're non-binding, right? So economies then say, this is what I'm doing. We have individual action plans, right? So they come and they present the individual action plans, and then we also have the collective action plans. So what we do is we monitor this, and this year is the first time we're going to report progress of those plans. So this year, when the ministers meet in November, we will be presenting our report of how we see ourselves, where have we gone, what have we done, what have we not done. So it's not binding in that sense. It's still voluntary, but best endeavor is what we do. And we've also working with the PSU to see how we can have, we have qualitative measures that comes from the individual action plans, the collective action plans, but we look at the PSU, the Policy Support Unit, to see whether we can have quantitative measures. They not be, so we need to have these complementary ways of tracking how we implement our all those aspirations and targets.
This support will come on a call, which needed.
This is for the first 2 years of the implementation of the Putrajaya vision. So every 2 years we are supposed to implement it. So we technically started implementation end of 21, 22, and so 23 is the first time we'll make the report. Yeah.
Yeah, hi, I'm Lisa. I'm from the Wall Street Journal. My question is for Carlos, and it's on the slide, geoeconomic fragmentation. I did have a kind of a follow-up. So it says ASEAN takes FDI lead over China, and we've kind of noticed from, I guess, 2020, ASEAN's been taking quite a big share. Can you break it down a little bit in terms of what sectors the greenfield investment is coming in, and what is the driving force, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's electronics, for example, is one of them. But I would say there are many drivers. It's not just this the measures that in recent years, I mean, the U.S. administration, Trump administration started to implement, and the regulatory measures from China. It's also about issues that are related, I would say, to China's economic success, because what's happening in China? Prices are going up. So China is no longer, a place where wages are cheap. And so many companies are looking for other places where they could produce at a cheaper cost. So that's one of the, I would say, one of the main drivers. I would say, it's electronics, goods that are intensive in certain types of technology. We also have noticed, for example, some car makers investing more in the region, and also I think sectors that are intensive in labor, because, as I said, I mean, labor is getting more expensive in China. So we see, for example, in the case of ASEAN, some of the least developed members of ASEAN, they are getting a lot of investments in textiles, apparel, footwear, among other sectors. Yeah.
Actually, it's just a question of the sectors. Which
this is I need to get back to you, but it is a very recent year. I think it's 2021 probably. Yeah, I need to get back to you on that.
And good morning. My name is Anton. I'm with the Southeast Asia Globe in Cambodia. And a growing concern is that to achieve clean energy, the environmental degradation that can cause could almost counterbalance that. How is APEC kind of dealing with that balance between development for clean energy that doesn't negatively impact the rest of the environment?
Yep. Like, for example, the work that we're doing on the just energy transition, those conversations, I think this is where it will surface. And when the energy ministers meet, I'm sure that the business sector will also be there. Academia will be there, so they will be also presenting their thoughts on how we can really have this just energy transition. If we look, and I think the finance ministers also, when they meet in October, they will be talking of green financing. One of the concerns I think that they have is on taxonomy. What is how do you do the financing? What is green financing at the end of the day? And I'm going to give you an example of Malaysia. I'm not sure whether there are Malaysians in the room, but Malaysia, for example, the central bank has a list of industries that banks should not be financing. So going forward, if you've done it already, then you need to taper it. But if you haven't, you're not supposed to. So I think there are 5 sectors that they've identified for no financing. One, of course, was the oil and gas, the coal sector. But I remember flagging this because the solar depends on where the solar how you get the solar panels. Do you put the solar farms, or are they greenfield or brownfield? So those are kinds of questions that policymakers need to ask. And these are, like I said, these are tough questions. I mean, it's always very sexy to say, we're going into renewable, even sexier to say you're doing EV, but, those, how are they fossil fuel based batteries, production rather. So those are kinds of questions. And I think that's where that dialogue that we facilitate in APEC helps us, to help the policymakers think through some of these policies that they're putting in place, some of the regulatory changes that they want to make. You need to factor in exactly what you've just said. Yeah.
And yesterday we learned a new term, which was like non-trade objectives and kind of values, making their way into business and economy conversations. Is that something that you have been dealing with?
Yeah. So, the fact that we put people first, and you will see this more and more in the case of this year's conversations, is workers first. No. So what are the social safety nets you're putting in place as you're talking of digitalization, and you're talking sustainability? What kind of safety nets when industries and individuals have to make that change? Can we afford those the social safety nets? So those are conversations that are going on, and these are important conversations.
Hi, this is Manas. I'm from India for a news agency. My question is, India has been one of the countries recording impressive economic growth in the last few years, oscillating between 6 to 8% consistently. And India's bilateral trade with almost all the APEC countries, including China, US, ASEAN, increasing very rapidly. So has there been any interest on India's part to join APEC, or in fact, do you want India to be brought to the table within the APEC? Yeah.
Well, we have 21 member economies, as I said, and for a while there was a moratorium on membership. The moratorium ended, I think, in 2010, if I'm not mistaken. But we've not. You see, it's a matter of economies coming forward to say, hey, I want to be in the club. But to date, I can recall only one, I think, that's really pushing to be member. But we haven't heard much from India. Although I must say, India was the first way back when but that was during the moratorium to say that they wanted to be a member.
But in just to complement, in APEC, all decisions are made by consensus. So if there haven't been new members for a long time, it means that there hasn't been consensus on the matter. Yeah.
Yeah, but also nobody's asked, apart from one particular economy, but yeah. Good. Okay. All right. Well, thank you both so much. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.